Here we go. Ah, there it is.
Okay, that should do it. Thank you so much. So my name is Retha Knoetze, and Tanusha Dukhan will also be presenting with me today. And our topic is, are we playing the same game? Contested spaces within higher education curricula. So I'm first going to just introduce where we come from a little bit, and then I'll get into my study. So both of us are affiliated with CHURTL, which is the Center for Higher Education Research, Teaching and Learning at Rhodes University. And our group is called the Rhodes LCT cluster. So we're a group of PhD students who are all using LCT in our PhDs. Most of us are at the early stages of in the early phases of our PhDs. And we meet weekly to do like informal presentations and to kind of support each other through the PhD journey. This is, by the way, our biggest presentation yet, so bear with us, we're a little nervous. Tanusha and I, we have a lot of overlap in our studies, so that's why we thought it would make sense for us to present together. Both of us are looking at the South African context. So I'll be talking a bit about the context which will apply to Tanusha's study as well. And we're both looking at higher education curricula. And both of us are interested in making the rules of the game of a discipline more explicit by using LCT concepts. We're also both in the early phases of our PhD studies. My proposal has just been accepted, so I'm in the early stages of data collection, and Tanusha is about to submit her proposal. So it's still early days. Carl, your hand is that up?
Oh, no, that was me. That was me clapping for you being accepted.
Okay,
well
cool.
done.
Thank you.
Good stuff.
Thank you. So I'm going to tell you about my PhD study, just like a brief thing so that you understand what I'm doing, but then I'm going to hop back into context for a little bit before I talk about the rationale for my study and methodology. And what I'd really like is to have some comments on methodology and any input, since we're still starting out. My study is going to look at an English literature curriculum at a distance education institution. So the university is called the University of South Africa, which is where I work, and which is abbreviated usually as Unisa. And I'll be using specialization and semantics to try to demystify the discipline of English literary studies as it is practiced at Unisa. But first, let's get into some context. So note that I'm going to kind of summarize some really, really big issues very, very quickly. So I'm going to be oversimplifying. Higher education in South Africa pre-94. So we, had British colonialism for a very long time, and then in the 1950s, apartheid. And that has had major influences that are still felt today very much so in the higher education sector, which is why I want to briefly mention these issues. Basically, under British colonialism, higher education served colonial interest, imposing Eurocentric views and values, subjugating indigenous knowledges, and entrenching the idea of white superiority. And then during apartheid, we had separate institutions for white students and black students, with black students being offered an inferior level of education. And this has resulted in significantly curtailed occupational and economic opportunities for black students. And we have a massive gap in South Africa in terms of like rich and poor, and major inequalities that we are still dealing with as a result of the legacy of apartheid. So then post 94, 94 was the first democratic election in South Africa. And we've had a notable increase in access for Black students to the higher education sphere in the last 20 or so years. But our student success rates remain sharply skewed by race and prior education. So that's how we're still feeling the effects of apartheid. And as I mentioned, we've got these major economic disparities in South Africa, and your socioeconomic circumstances are the biggest indicator still in South Africa about your likelihood of success in a higher education institution. In 2015, we had the hashtag Rhodes must fall and hashtag fees must fall movements, student protests that have impacted the dialogue that is happening in the higher education sector. And some of you might know that we've actually got student protests ongoing again now related to fees. So the main focus of these movements were on increased student fees, and which shows you that we've still got, you know, issues with access to the university for the economically disadvantaged students. But there was also a focus on transforming the Eurocentric culture of historically white universities. So, for example, the Black student movement criticized Rhodes University in 2015 for being, quote, an alienating and marginalizing space for the majority of students. So all of this is just to kind of orient my study a little bit to indicate why I'm doing what I'm doing, which I'll get to. But firstly, I just want to highlight one concept which I'll be using, which is epistemological access. So this concept was actually coined by a South African researcher, Wally Morrow, and he made a distinction between formal access and epistemological access, where formal access relates to physical access to an institution, and epistemological access relates to, quote, learning how to become a successful participant in an academic practice. So we've got issues with both of these things in South Africa. We've still got, you know, the fees issues. A lot of our students don't have physical access to the university, although there have been major improvements. But then we've also got like the issue with student success rates, their ability to participate in the academic disciplines in which they are registered. And my study is quite interested in this issue of epistemological access. So the last context which I want to tell you about is specifically about the University of South Africa. Unisa enrolls almost 1/3 of all South African students. It's the largest open distance learning institution in Africa. It's got close to 400,000 current students. It provides many students access to tertiary education who would not have had access to a traditional contact university. So this is for a variety of reasons, including that the fees at Unisa are more affordable than at contact universities. A lot of our students are also working full-time and studying part-time, and they wouldn't be able to attend physical classes, but the distance nature of Unisa allows for them to study part-time. And then Unisa also tends to have lower academic entry requirements than other universities. So we're servicing a group of students who are studying part-time, and a lot of students who are also who come from high schools that are, so I should explain that in South Africa, we also have major issues with our tertiary education, our secondary education system, where we've got like the old advantaged white schools that we had during the apartheid period that are still very advantaged, and then we've got a very inferior quality of education in the schools that most of our socioeconomically disadvantaged students attend. So Unisa offers a lot of those. So a lot of our students will come from those schools that are not as strong academically. And then I should mention that about 50% of South Africa's teachers come from Unisa. So, and because we've got these issues in the education sector at secondary level, you know, changing things at Unisa can have major improvements for South Africa as a whole. Then the Department of English Studies at Unisa, where my study is located, we have 10 modules. If you wanted to do an English major in English, you would take 2 first-year modules, 3 second-year modules, 5 third-year modules. And these modules would be a mix of language and literature modules. And students who study our courses are BA students who might major in English, so they would take the courses up to 3rd year level, or they could be taking only up to 1st or 2nd year if they're not majoring. And then we've got our education students, which make up a large group of our students, specifically the students who will be teaching high school English courses. So now the English department has been plagued, specifically in the English literature modules, with very low pass rates for a very long time, to the extent that our modules have received a reputation, often called barrier modules. So what will often happen is that, like, an education student will have completed all 4 years of their undergraduate, all of their modules, but they'll be sitting with like 1st year English literature, which they can't pass, and which is, you know, keeping them from completing their degree. So this is why we've developed this reputation for being barrier modules. And the kind of common sense explanation that is often provided for why we have such low pass rates is people say, our students have low proficiency in English, which, you know, most of our students are 3rd or 4th or 5th language, 5th language English speakers, so it's definitely not their mother tongue. But it should be noted that that our students do take all of their modules in English, so they will have passed all 4 years of their education modules in English, because that's the language of teaching and learning at Unisa. So, and the other thing that should be noted is, as I've mentioned, our courses, we have language as well as literature modules in our department, and the students tend to do quite a bit better in the language modules than the literature modules. So all of this suggests to me that there's something else going on here, that there's something more than just a low proficiency in English, which is causing the low pass rates. And I've come to suspect that it might have more to do with discursive practices, you know, the kind of academic literacy practices that are expected within English literature courses, that these are the things that we're struggling to translate to our students, and that might be causing some of the problems. And these suspicions are based on, you know, like, lots of my colleagues will often say things like, you know, we're trying to teach our students to think critically, but our students just want an answer that they can study and reproduce, and we're not looking for that kind of thing. We're looking for students to engage and provide their own ideas, not for them to study a pre-made answer. So that's the kind of thing that suggests to me that there's some kind of code clash going on. So that's the context of the study, which I think leads quite naturally into the rationale, which is that I would like to use LCT tools to investigate the tacit norms underlying the English literary studies curriculum in our department. And the reason that I want to do this is because I think that rendering those implicit values that underpin the curriculum, making those things explicit, will firstly allow lecturers to teach those practices and values more overtly, and then hopefully also enable more epistemological access to a more diverse student body. So I'm hoping that this will improve pedagogy and allow our students to understand what those expectations are. I should note here that English literature there have been previous studies that have used LCT to look at English literature, and the discipline is usually coded as, I'll get into specialization in a minute, but as a NOAA code discipline that requires a cultivated gaze. So the idea here is that it's the kind of discipline where students have to be immersed in that discipline for a long period of time to kind of imbibe almost the values of the discipline, and to kind of learn to take on the gaze that is valued, the way of looking at the world that is valued within the discipline. And because of this, we often find that lecturers find it difficult to articulate exactly what it is that we're looking for, like, for example, in a student essay. For example, we never have a memorandum for an English literature essay to say this is what the student should have said in their essay. Every essay needs to be evaluated on its own merit by somebody who is an insider in the discipline. So there's a lot of tacit, tacit expectations going on there, and I'm wondering if perhaps, if I could maybe highlight those things a little bit more, perhaps we could try to teach them more explicitly in our curriculum. But then the other point of my rationale is that, so I've told you about the feast must fall movements and the kind of challenges to the Eurocentric curriculum in higher education institutions. But it's my argument that you can't decolonize something if you can't see what it is that a discipline legitimates. So I want to try and highlight what those values are, those tacit things that we value, so that we can then start asking those critical questions about, okay, but are these Eurocentric values, and in what ways perhaps we need to shift our expectations in order to decolonize our curriculum. Okay, so that's my rationale. I'm going to tell you about my research questions, and I'm going to then tell you a bit more about how I'm planning to use LCT to answer those questions. And I think here, if people want to jump in, please feel free to do so. I've just got my research questions so that you can see them here. The first one is, what kinds of knowledge and knowers are
Can I ask
legitimated?
something?
Yes, Carl, please go
I was just going to
ahead.
say, I'm sure that this is what you meant. This is more for kind of general consumption, which is that while other studies have suggested that English in those circumstances has been a cultivated no code, there's nothing to say that it is everywhere,
Yes.
and
Yeah.
it can easily be taught as a relativist code with virtually nothing seeming the basis of it. I've seen enough incredibly bad lessons to
Yes.
see relativist codes where students have got a clue what's going on, or it might be
Yeah.
taught in a very, particularly get something like grammar or something, could be really taught in a
Yes.
very you know, kind of very kind of knowledge
Oh,
code sort of way,
yeah.
particularly if people are working to
Yes.
some sort of strict set of guidelines. I'm sure that's not what you were saying, that it's always like that,
Yes. Yes.
but just for everybody else's edification, really, which is, it's always struck me as being incredibly important to say, yeah, we think it's going to be this, but it might not be,
Yes.
because I got tripped up thinking science has to always be a knowledge code, and then in the big massive studies of student and teacher perceptions conducted here by Sarah Howard, it turned out a big proportion of teachers and students thought it was a relativist code, which I couldn't believe. But there you go,
Sure.
you know, it can be a
Yeah.
code everywhere. So I was
Yeah.
just sort of wanting
Yeah.
to add on that little kind of, you know, PS to what you were
Yes.
saying. It's not I'm not arguing with you, but just sort of reminding everybody that it may not always be that code. I mean, that's the code that we think it should be most of the time, we think, but it may not always be that, huh?
Yes. Yeah. So I am definitely, and the thing is, because it's a distance education institution, that might also have an effect on how the discipline is taught, which might make it quite different. Billy, you have your hand up.
Hi, Rita. Nice to hear you from Rhodes. I'm in Pietermaritzburg. I just wanted to ask you, have you come across the work of Mary Mackin-Horerick, who does
Yes.
okay, I'm just checking. So, I mean, that also is what you've done,
Yeah. Yes, thank you so
yeah.
much. Yeah, I
Yeah,
should
okay.
read more of her stuff, though. I haven't read all of her stuff.
Yeah, but there was particularly her classification of different types of English
Yeah. Yes.
and the
Yes.
different
Yes.
ways English is taught. And yeah,
Yes, I
okay,
have seen
that's
that. It's
great.
very good. Thank you.
Yeah.
Cool. So, okay. So my research questions, what kinds of knowledge and knowers are legitimated in the Unisa undergraduate English literature curriculum? So here we are kind of clearing the ground and making sure that, you know, those. So as Cole's mentioned, I am expecting to find a cultivated gaze in the literature module specifically, but it could be different. So that's why it's necessary to kind of look at the data. So I'm going to ask questions about the specialization codes, about the assuming gazes, but I've got insights there as well, and then the lenses. And then my second question is, does the literature curriculum at the Department of English Studies at Unisa enable epistemological access to the discipline? So my sub-questions here are, how explicit is the curriculum about what legitimates knowledge and knowers in the discipline? And also, does the curriculum enable cumulative learning? And this is where I get into my LCT tools and how I'm planning to use them. So specialization, I think I'm not going to, or would you like me to kind of give an explanation of what specialization and semantics is, or should I just jump into how I'm going to be using
No,
them?
I think it's really good. I think it's, I mean, like, I think it's really valuable to, you know, like people are always relatively new. There's always
Okay.
relatively new people. And the other reason it's really useful is that so that we don't ever have someone kind of using, say, like someone might say semantic density and completely have misunderstood what that means, but without, you know, an
Okay.
opportunity for us to go, oh, hang on, you're using that in a slightly different way. So yeah, you don't have to go through the whole history, but a bit of a
Yeah, yeah.
summary would be
Okay.
really valuable.
Cool.
So we know where you're coming from as well.
Okay. Okay.
Oh, and
So
also
I've got
because
a
people may watch this for the first time. This may be their first way into LCT.
Okay, cool. I'll give it my best. So I'm going to do a quick then overview of specialization, and then talk a little bit about how I'm planning to use it, and the same for semantics. So for specialization, it's important to know that practices, so for example, the practices within the discipline of English Literary Studies, which is my focus, are always oriented towards something and by someone. So this means we've got relationships within these practices between knowledge and its proclaimed object of study. And then we've also got relationships between knowledge and its author or subject. So this is the relationship between knowledge and its object of study is called epistemic relations, and between knowledge and its authors or subjects is called social relations. And the idea is that there can be relative strengths of epistemic relations and social relations. So maybe, you know, one practice or discipline puts a stronger emphasis on the relationship between knowledge and its object of study, which is usually what we find in the more scientific disciplines, while perhaps in a different discipline, the relationship between that knowledge and its subject is more important. And here, basically, when we have these varying strengths of epistemic and social relations, which can vary independently, if we plot these things on a Cartesian plane, we end up with 4 possible main specialization codes. So you can plot your practices of your discipline to try and reveal a main specialization code, if there is such a thing, for your discipline. And this is supposed to give us one aspect, to reveal one aspect of the rules of the game, or the basis for legitimacy within a specific field of practice. So I've got the just a Cartesian plane thingy here. Yeah, basically I've already said that plotting your practices of your discipline on this plane, saying, okay, this practice values you know, the relationship between knowledge and the subject is more important here, or the relationship between knowledge and its object is more important here, or both of them are important. This will allow you to kind of like almost like put a dot somewhere where you think this discipline would fall on this plane. And if you find that you've got a lot of your practices fall within one of these 4 segments, that will tell you that the predominant code of the discipline is a Noah code or a knowledge code or whatever. And something that that I'm interested in doing, because I'm going to talk in a minute a bit more about the what differentiates my study, but I'm looking at 6 different English literature modules. So I'm going to be coding all of the modules individually. And I want to see whether there are any possible code clashes or clashes in terms of gazes and lenses between these modules. And I think that will help me to see whether the curriculum is segmented or not. So are all of the modules valuing the same thing? Just to just say, I'm looking at only the literature modules in the curriculum, because I'm pretty sure that the literature modules are going to have different specialization codes to the language modules, and our students are specifically struggling with the literature modules. So I'm interested in seeing, do we have coherence there in terms of, you know, our curriculum and how we're teaching these things? Are we valuing the same things in the different modules? If we are not, are we kind of taking students systematically from one position and moving them towards, you know, a different kind of way of looking at the world? Or is it just like chaos for the students, where they are being thrown into all these different codes and they don't have a way to orient themselves within the different modules? So that's what I'm interested in doing with specialization. And I've mentioned I'll probably be, I'm expecting that I'll be looking at gazes and lenses as well. And obviously insights if we're working with the stronger epistemic relations. But I think, especially because I'm looking at a bunch of modules that are all within the same discipline and the same curriculum, that the distinctions between what these modules value might be more nuanced than on the bigger, you know, the main specialization code plane. I'm expecting that they will be lower code modules, but you know, it could be different. But I do expect that there will at least be distinctions in terms of perhaps the kind of gazes or the lenses in terms of what is valued in the different modules. And I'm hoping that doing this analysis will give us a lot of ideas about how to teach this curriculum in a better way in order to enable cumulative learning. So, okay, I think I've talked enough about lenses for now. Then semantics. So semantics can be used to reveal the complexity of practices or concepts, and also how context bound they are. So semantic density relates to how dense concepts or practices are. For example, like the concept of sunlight, if used like colloquially, common sensely, is less dense than the concept of photosynthesis, where there's a lot of different processes and ideas that all build into this one concept. And I can use semantic density to look at whether, like, how dense the concepts in our curriculum are, but also whether we are building systematically from less dense concepts to, you know, the denser concepts that encompass a lot of the previous concepts that we've taught. And semantic gravity relates to how context-bound practices are. So, my example here, my cats like tuna, it has stronger semantic gravity because it's tied to a very specific context. It's my cat and their dietary preferences, as opposed to something about this you know, Felis catus is a carnivorous mammal. So that's a broader generalization that can be extrapolated. Which is, you know, has weaker semantic gravity. And various studies have suggested that to build cumulative knowledge, we need to move between stronger and weaker semantic density. So we need to move from a specific context, and then we need to abstract the theoretical principles that can be abstracted from there. And we need to be able to do this in order to kind of learn those principles that can then be reapplied to a different context. So I can use semantic gravity to look at the curriculum and see, are we making these shifts so that students can, for example, look at one literary text and then abstract the ways of looking at that text that we've taught, so that that can be reapplied to a different text, as opposed to just like thinking that they have to learn everything about Catcher in the Rye, and the minute that you change the text, then they're lost. So that's semantic gravity. And yeah, so basically the next slide or two talk about my methodology and my data sources. So what data I'm going to use and how I want to use LCT to look at those data sources. So I've obviously got a qualitative case study of the Unisa English Literature undergrad curriculum. I'm looking at 6 modules because I'm only looking at the modules that have a literature component in the English major curriculum. And my study is specifically interested in uncovering the basis of the discursive practices that are valued within the English literature modules. So that's why I'm looking at those. My data sources, I've got lecturer interviews. So this is also something that's interesting about Unisa, is it's a very big department. We've got actually more than 25 lecturers teaching on these English literature undergraduate modules, all with their own opinions and views of what literature should be, and often kind of working in quite a bit of isolation from other modules. So I'm going to be interviewing these lecturers to ask them about, to try and find out about the basis for legitimacy in their specific modules, by asking them questions about what knowledge, skills, attributes, and values they value within their modules. Jennifer, your hand is up.
Thank you. This is all very interesting. I posed a question in the chat earlier in terms of how much leeway individual instructors had in terms of setting the modules and like, and further curious about perhaps where they trained and how much influence that might have on their disposition, their body of knowledge, their rhetorical training, that sort of thing. But the way that you've described here with it sounds like they have a fair bit of professional autonomy. Is there any coherence or basis of comparison for these individual modules? Like, what's the central thread that makes module 3? Is it a particular story or is it a particular lens? Can you help sort that a bit?
Okay, so the curriculum, when it was designed, there were various people who worked on it together and kind of conceptualized it as a degree program. But interestingly, a lot of those people will not even be necessarily working on those modules anymore. So there was an idea, often the people who are now working on those modules don't even know what that idea was when the curriculum was conceptualized. And these people have been trained at lots of different universities in South Africa. So I think I'm going to find a fair bit of kind of contestation over what it is that should be valued within the discipline of English literature. And there's not a lot of, we don't really have the language to kind of always talk about what it is that we value. So I expect to find some clashes there. But yes, there is, like, I can look at the module, the program forms that were submitted to our higher education policing body, SAQA and so on, for the overarching structure of the curriculum. I don't know if that answers you.
Thank you. It does. It from an analytical perspective, it's going to be an unwieldy beast to sort through.
Yes. So thank you. So I'm hoping that my research will, feed back into the department as well and help to kind of give us a language to talk about these things and to kind of highlight to people, because I don't think often we don't even realize that we're not valuing the same things, So, okay, lecture interview study material. Because it's a distance education curriculum and it's actually quite old school, like we have these long study guides that have like a written out curriculum. So that's nice for me to be able to like look at this material that's been written down and to kind of use semantics and specialization to compare the different modules in terms of what they legitimate, and also to kind of look at whether there's semantic waves being made within modules and also perhaps across modules, where we're using theoretical abstracted principles taught in previous modules and applying to new contexts and so on, whether or not that is happening. I'm also going to look at assignment and exam questions to see whether that correlates, whether we're legitimating the same things that we say we're legitimating in our lecturer interviews and in our study material. And I think it will also be interesting to look at student essays, high scoring student essays specifically, because that will tell us a lot about what is valued. And also to see if the semantic profiles of those essays can do anything for us in terms of showing us perhaps ways in which we can teach the discipline to students who are struggling more to understand what it is that we want in an English literature essay. And then lastly, I've got student interviews, so I am worried about how much data I'm collecting. But I would like to talk to students about their experiences in terms of the coherence of the curriculum, understanding what it is or not understanding what it is that is valued, and kind of whether they found the curriculum to be coherent. The idea is to interview students who have completed all 3 years of the curriculum so that they can give me, you know, can reflect on the 3-year curriculum. So the last thing that I just want to mention is kind of my contribution for the study, or my anticipated contribution. As I've mentioned, I have, there are quite a number of other studies that have used LCT to look at English literature. So there are even 2 studies that have looked at English literature at a South African university curriculum using LCT. But what is different about my study is, firstly, we've got the distance education context. So that could, you know, make things very different in terms of what we legitimate. It's also going to be interesting to reflect on how what's usually, you know, seen as a cultivated gaze that needs to be taught, whether we are trying to cultivate that gaze at a distance, you know, through distance education, and to reflect on our ability to do this kind of thing through online education. Then I'll be looking at a curriculum over the course of 3 years. The studies that I've seen have all looked only at a first-year level. And I think looking at all 3 years is going to allow me to firstly be able to look more at like the idea of cumulative knowledge or knower building across like a longer period of time, to get more data about how this process works or doesn't work. But also the fact that I'm looking at these different modules within the same department will allow me to kind of compare codes, compare lenses, and so on, to see whether there's coherence there, and to possibly pick up on contestation over the legitimation device. So possible clashes, perhaps, in terms of what is valued in different modules or by different academics within the discipline. Carol, your hand is up.
Thanks, Rita. This sounds like really a fascinating study. Really, really interesting. I guess just 2 comments. The one thing I was thinking, I don't want to add to your study because it's already quite dense, but you know, I think there's also a code clash between what students study, how students study literature at school. And yes. I don't know if you've seen the Umalusi reports on they might be worth looking at. You know, interestingly, the language, especially the African languages, have incredibly high pass rates at matric, which is really interesting. It's kind of like 93, 94, 95%. And so Umalusi did studies around that. And I think, you know, I think students are not expected to engage critically with literature.
Yes,
at
thank
school.
you for
And
that.
so I think there might also be quite a huge clash between, you know, those kinds of things. It might be worth looking at.
Yes, thank you.
I don't know if you know the Umalusi reports on curriculum. You'll find them on the Umalusi website.
Don't.
Or I can, if you want to email me, I can track them down for you.
That would
but
be
Umalusi
really
done quite a lot of research around language curriculum and assessment at school level.
Cool, thank you.
And I don't know if this is useful, but to me, the study seems huge. And I'm wondering if you wouldn't need to select your lecturers, for example. 25 lecturer interviews is quite huge. I don't know, but because you're doing a really in-depth study, it sounds like you don't want to drown in too much data. I'm also just thinking maybe a possibility to think about a survey with students rather than interviews. Maybe a kind of Google form survey that's quite just as short, that also might be a way to get data from students and maybe to you know, to get their perspective on what is expected. But yeah, I think this is really fascinating. Thanks for sharing it with us.
Thank you so much. That comment about, so this is definitely, I think, this issue of how literature is taught at school, and just in general, kind of what is valued at school. I mean, there's a lot of well, I know Chrissy Bowie's research, you know, has suggested that kind of what is valued at university level in general versus what is valued at school, that there's a code clash there. So I definitely am interested in that, and thought that I might pick up on that as well in my student interviews. About the collecting data with like questionnaires, we did discuss, like I discussed this with my supervisor, with Sue, who I think is here. But we thought that I might not get very good data from students by sending out questionnaires, because these are issues that are quite complex that you might need to kind of talk through with a student. Yeah, so I'm not sure if I'm going to get good data if I do it that way. For the interviews with lecturers,
that does make sense.
Yeah. So for the interviews with lecturers, like I was hoping that the thing is, they might not all grant me an interview, which will automatically. So I'm kind of almost hoping that not every single one of them is keen for an interview. But perhaps I'll, if they all want to grant me an interview, perhaps I'll have to look at cutting that down. Billy, please go ahead.
Hi, thanks. I was just looking at your relevance section here again, and just to say that, you know, with us all under so-called emergency remote teaching at the moment,
yes,
and the enthusiasm of South African university management for more remote learning, or mixed mode, or whatever they're trying to call it, blended. That's right. Yeah. That's your study has real relevance for getting into that debate as well. You know, if we're going to be teaching cultivated codes, you know, cultivated Noah codes, you know, how do you get that across in blended learning or online, or as we have to do over WhatsApp?
Yeah, thank you. Okay, I think that's basically my presentation.
You've got a bunch
of
people have been asking questions, and I have encouraged them to jump in and actually ask themselves, because I know the presenters can't actually read, chat, and talk at the same time. No one can. No, I didn't expect you to. No one can. So if anybody who has asked a question wants to jump in and actually ask their question, that would be really great. Before we move on to the next part. Anyone? No, a bunch of people have asked but not come forward to suggest.
Rita, you told us
Sue.
you told us the staff numbers. Tell us the student numbers. I don't think you did.
Oh, okay. So undergraduate, first year, we have about 20,000 first years. So that's crazy. And then we have like about, for second year, we have about 6,000 students usually, and then third year it like tapers off majorly. We have like 120 students about usually, because those are only the students who are majoring in English, and the education teachers only take English up to second year, not to third year level. So that's another issue of the, you know, teaching English literature to 20,000 first year students at the same time is a tall order. So I'm happy to hand over to Tanusha if people are ready for her, and then I could maybe even look at the chat and see if there's something there that I need to answer later on.
Thank you, Rita. Okay. Thank you very much, everyone, for allowing us the space to talk to you about how we're going to use LCT in our projects. The title of my PhD thesis is The Legitimation of Human Anatomy and Physiology Curriculum for the Bachelor of Pharmacy degree. Now, Rita has already told you about the contexts in which South African universities survive after the legacies of apartheid and our colonial history. So I'm just going to tell you a little bit about the Bachelor of Pharmacy degrees. These degrees are offered all over the world, and there's generally a first or second year of science courses like chemistry and maths and physics and human anatomy and physiology that then follows with clinical courses that are more structured for pharmacy students. So with these degrees, you start off with a very basic science course and then go into more courses that deal with pharmacy itself. And the way that the courses are structured actually changes depending on the country and the university. So for example, in Australia and India, it's a 4-year degree, and human anatomy is either taught as a combined course or it's taught as separate courses. So in Australia, they don't really teach anatomy, but they teach physiology in the second year. In India, you teach anatomy and physiology as one course in the first year. In Egypt and Australia, it's more of a 5-year degree, and anatomy and histology is actually taught in a preparatory year, and physiology is taught in the first year of the course itself. In the US, it's actually a prerequisite to have a Bachelor of Science in Pharmacy, and then you have to do a doctorate in pharmacy to become a pharmacist. So every way the course is actually structured really differently, or the curriculum is quite different. In South Africa, we have a 4-year degree that graduates students as a general pharmacist, which means that when students graduate, they can either go into industry and work in manufacturing and wholesaling, or they can go into community pharmacy and hospitals where they can actually deal with patients and dispensation. So in South Africa itself, we still follow the basic science course route where we have the first or second year full of basic science courses. And then we have the following years where you have more pharmacology, pharmaceutics, and foundations of pharmacy practice that teaches students more about how to become a pharmacist itself. Here at Rhodes University, we teach a combined anatomy and physiology course, and we teach it in the second half of the first year and then in the first half of the second year. So our students are still fresh students, they're still trying to understand the basics of the courses itself. Now, technically, all of these courses should have explicit rules on what they're about. And if we look at the pharmacists that are practicing here in South Africa currently, these numbers show all of the registered pharmacists in South Africa itself. And every year a pharmacist has to re-register with the Pharmacy Council in order to practice as a pharmacist. So these numbers are for all of the people who've graduated throughout the year. And we can actually see quite visibly that there is still a lot of remnants of our apartheid history. However, our student population is a little bit better. It is slightly more reflective of the South African demographics. However, as Rita pointed out earlier, access to education is not enough. Physical access is not enough. So we have to ensure epistemological access. And one of the ways that we can do this is by using legitimation code theory. Now, I've chosen to look at the curriculums for anatomy and physiology because physiology is my area of specialization. And as a physiologist, I clearly understand the difference between anatomy and physiology. Now, these two disciplines are related, but they're distinct. And I'm going to explain how they're related and distinct by using an analogy. So we all know the game of rugby and soccer. Now, these two can be said to be related and distinct. Related in that they're both played on fields, they're both played using balls and goalposts, and they're both team sports. But they're distinct in that the way, the rules that a rugby player uses to score points through a goalpost is very different from the rules that a soccer player would use to score points through a goalpost. Now, the rules that are different for rugby players and soccer players are kind of also different for anatomists and physiologists. We have a common understanding of what knowledge is because we both science backgrounded disciplines. So we both understand that for us, knowledge is all about objective facts that can either be measured or observed and verified using scientific process. But the details of what counts as knowledge for anatomists is bounded against structure, location, and relation, which means that when an anatomist looks at the body, they're really interested in what builds the body. What are the structures that make up every cell? How do all the cells fit together to make up organs, where those organs are in the body, and where the organs are in relation to other organs in the body? That's a very reduced way of thinking about what anatomists do. Physiologists, on the other hand, are concerned with details about function. So as a physiologist, you're more interested in how the body works. How does the body actually get you up in the morning? How does the body react when the environment is hot? And how does it react when the environment is cold? What are the actual steps that the body has to follow in order to bring about the hunger response? And how does your entire body maintain a perfect balance with all of these changing environments? So that is what physiologists really, really look at. Now, as scientists, and because we believe that knowledge is about facts, we can conceive that anatomy and physiology as disciplines can be taught together because they are related. And what we think we can do is just put in relevant facts so that students understand how each system works. And basically, what we're saying is that as an anatomist or as a physiologist, you can teach students about the body by just focusing on the different systems that they need to learn about. Now, this is kind of like asking someone to teach students how to play a game using a ball and a goalpost. If you're an anatomist, you're going to teach them in one way. If you're a physiologist, you're going to teach them another way. If you're a rugby player, you're going to teach them the games and the rules of rugby. If you are a soccer player, you're going to teach them the games and rules of soccer. Now, we can agree that the students that come out of this course are going to have two different views and two different knowledge bases. And they're going to use the rules differently in their courses as well. So when we look at our curriculum and as combined as an anatomy and physiology course, we actually need to ask ourselves, how are we teaching the students and what are we teaching the students? Now, for example, if we look at the heart, this is a beautiful organ that has wonderful cells and structures that work together. An anatomist values those details. And if an anatomist was teaching this course, they're going to be focusing on the details of structure, where the heart is in relation to blood vessels and lungs. As a physiologist, you're going to teach them how the heart actually produces this beautiful rhythmic movement and how it maintains a beautiful rhythmic movement when, for example, you're very nervous and doing a presentation, or you are doing exercise, or you've come out of exercise and your heart now needs to relax. Now, we teach this course, Anatomy and Physiology, to pharmacists. For a pharmacist, when they look at the heart, they actually need to focus on how the drugs that they are prescribing or developing is going to affect the heart, whether they wanted to mimic the function and the structure, or whether they want to alter the function and alter the structure. So the real question is, for this course that is taught at Rhodes University, do anatomists who have previously taught the course teach it using the same rules as physiologists who currently teach the course? And is it conceptualized in the same way for pharmacists for whom the course is actually made? So in order to get into this, I have to look outside of science and the positivists' concepts that we know about knowledge. And I have to orientate knowledge to being something that is orientated towards someone, towards something by someone. So the first question that I want to ask is, what is the basis of achievement for this course? And to answer that, we're going to use specialization. And I'm not going to go through specialization because Rita already did it, but what I am going to say is that what's going to be very interesting for me is how anatomists, physiologists, and pharmacists define knowers. So in order to use these planes, we need to define what we mean by knowers and what we mean by knowledge. And as science-based courses, we're all going to define knowledge in the same way, but how do we look at our knowers in this course? I think that an anatomist will look at a knower as someone who's studying to become an anatomist. So the students for the course will be regarded as someone who needs to know the rules of the discipline of anatomy, and the same goes for physiologists. But pharmacists kind of want, well, they want the students to become pharmacists. So the know is probably going to change depending on who is defining this. And for this course, we need to find a definition that works. And then I've got the pedagogic device here because I think that I'm going to be playing in the fields of reproduction. So I'm just going to explain this a little bit more. Bernstein had an incredible way of defining the different fields in which we use knowledge. And he defined the field of production as the space in which knowledge is created. So as a physiologist, that would be in the lab where we are testing theories and where we are figuring out how things work. Then Bernstein looked at the field of recontextualization as how knowledge is packaged into a curriculum and curriculized. So that would be how you select and the things that you select to put into a curriculum and teach students to become a certain type of knower. The field of reproduction is where learning takes place with the students. It's where your curriculum is enacted. So I think that in order to answer the question, I'm going to be looking at the curriculum that is already in place. So I'm going to be looking at the field of reproduction, but I'm also questioning how the curriculum or how knowledge is curriculized. So to me, I'm also working in the field of recontextualization, and I'm not sure if I'm being correct in saying that or not. So that's kind of something that I could get guidance on. Yeah. So in answering the question of what is the basis for achievement for this course, I could also then look at a sub-question, which is whether the course is actually contributing to the professional identity of the student. So if we are defining the knower as a student who's becoming a pharmacist, then the course should be tailored in a way that helps the student to become this knower, to become this pharmacist. And if we are using a different definition of knower as a teacher, then we're actually not contributing to the professional identity. But if in teaching and assessing, we are taking into account that the knower is a student who's becoming a pharmacist, then we are contributing to professional identity. The next question that I wanted to ask was, how do we apply knowledge in this course? And for that, I'm going to be using insights. So this is basically all about the what. Articulations are about the what of knowledge practices, and discursive relations about the how of knowledge practices. And the different codes that you get just talks to how you use knowledge practices. So a purist code is where you have principled knowledge with a specific approach that has to be followed. So when we're working in the lab as a physiologist, you following a specific route, and it has to link with theory. With doctrinal insight, you are not worried too much about the what of knowledge. You're not worried too much about principles. What you are worried about is how you do things. With your situational knowledge, it depends on the situation. So there isn't a particular principled theoretical knowledge, and there isn't a particular approach. It has to suit a certain context. And then the Noah code is more outside of the insights. So to answer the question of how do we apply knowledge, I want to see whether anatomists, physiologists, and pharmacists use the same insights when they're using anatomy and physiology. And in that way, I can judge whether the course is actually preparing students to use anatomy and physiology in the workplace. What's interesting here is that with this particular degree, you have general pharmacists who have different workplaces. So people in manufacturing, do those pharmacists use anatomy and physiology in the same way as people who are working with patients? So my data sources are going to come from a whole lot of documents that's regarding the course itself, so the course outcomes, course notes. We have a South African Pharmacy Council that gives us very strict guidelines on what needs to be taught, but those guidelines are very vague for anatomy and physiology because everybody assumes that anatomy and physiology is the same, it's all facts. And I want to use practical reports as well. I also want to interview different lecturers who've taught the course. I want to interview practicing pharmacists from different spheres of pharmacy, so industry and community pharmacy and hospital pharmacy and academia. And I want to interview the people who are on the South African Council and graduates. And hopefully with all the information that I get, we can figure out what the rules are for this particular course that is taught at Rhodes University. And after that, probably use semantics and autonomy, but that's going to be more of a postdoctoral project.
Yeah, one thing at a time, huh?
Yeah. Yes, so thank you so much for listening.
Thanks, both of you. It's amazingly, I love how between the two of you, you kind of covered, you know, the heart of the humanities and right out there into science and professional practice as well. It never ceases to, you know, amaze me that RCT is used so widely, but also enables us to talk across these disciplinary differences, because I mean, we shouldn't take it for granted if out in education so many models are very specifically based upon a particular area of education research. So the fact that we can talk to each other through these concepts despite having very different objects of study is great. What does before I say anything, has anybody got anything that they want to jump in? Please do just jump in and you know, ask anything, or where are you? Where did you? I can't remember if you said where are you in your journey, on your doctoral journey, Tanusha?
I'm at the very beginning phases, so I'm still going to submit my proposal to the High Degrees Committee.
So that's very early on. So in fact, by the way, I should just say, you know, well done for doing this, because the more often you present, the easier it gets, and the more opportunities you get to kind of push yourself into clarifying your thoughts. People always wait way too long to present. The more times you present your stuff, the easier it gets, the better you get at doing it, and so on. So does anybody have anything they want to sort of jump in? We've got
Yes,
lots of
Carl,
people.
may I? It's Shobha from...
Just jump in, yeah.
Yeah, I just wanted to deliver some lovely palki chips to you virtually. Nonetheless, I found this presentations very important, very interesting this morning. I tried to type a message in the chat, but My English is all over the place and I've missed words. I just want to say that the presentation about the anatomy and physiology I found extremely relevant to the UOT context, especially in terms of our professional qualifications and the way, you know, core subjects or whatever are brought together, and the varying degrees in which they would be enacted and result in very different legitimations or different knowledge building. But I also read a bit about the EPD in the chat, and I'm wondering whether largely a lot of the recontextualization that happens that brings these courses together actually comes from the field of reproduction. It's, you know, it's about having taught in this or being taught, being part of the teaching and learning experience as a pharmacist or a anatomy specialist or physiologist, that you bring that, and then there's very rare engagement with the scholarship and the differences in the scholarship that manifest in the curriculum. So I was just alerting to the fact that I think the EPD would be an interesting framework also that guides how this curricula gets legitimized or recontextualized. Thank you.
Thank you. Yes, I found the EPD to be quite a good concept for me to use, because I think we tend in science to put everything in one. So we tend to go from our research into the classroom and expect students to learn in that way. But having to see the different fields separately helps us to understand that when we teach, we're actually taking on a different role from where we are when we are researchers. We're looking at research and we're looking at our knowledge in a different way in those different spaces.
I think that's really important. I don't think, and I want to revise and redo a new version of the chapter that introduces the EPD, because it's just tortuous to read in Knowledge and Knowers, because I'm starting from Basil and trying to make arguments for what's limiting about it, and then trying to set out a new thing all in one chapter, like all of those chapters are. And it's just like it's torturing the reader as an introduction. It's not meant to be an introduction, so it needs an introduction. And one of the things that I would start from, and will do, is that, and I kind of obliquely mention it, is I think that a lot of academics fail to understand these different functions and different practices and the way in which knowledge is restructured every time it's moved. And Basil used to say, you know, every time knowledge is moved, that's a space for recontextualization, that's a space for changing the structure of the knowledge itself. It's because we have a tendency, this is just a conjecture, but I think it's because we have a tendency to move between them all the time. So we're doing, you know, like there's our research bit, and then there's our teaching, and we've put out our unit of study outlines or whatever. And so we're sort of shifting, we'd kind of like shift around the fields of the arena in our almost sort of, you know, from day to day or parts of the day. And you add that to the fact that most academics are bizarrely knowledge blind, and you don't see that difference between the structure of knowledge in, you know, field of production, and the structure of it when, you know, selected, arranged, and enacted as a curriculum, and then selected, arranged, and enacted again as teaching and learning, which is, I'm going off a slight tangent here, but one of my most annoyed things is I find very, very annoying is when people talk about teaching as enacted curricula, or just the curricula in action. It's like, you know, talk about yet more anti-teacher rhetoric. It is a selection, assembly, enactment of teaching as a pedagogization. So I think it's a very important part. But I have to say, yeah, I have to put my hands up and say, you know, sorry for how badly difficult it is to read in Knowledge and Knowers, because I didn't mean it as an introduction there. But I think it can be useful to make sense of the differences between these things. I mean, you might find in your PhD that, you know, you may have to dial it back for your proposal as to how many concepts you have, because, as I'm always saying, you know, there's only so much that people can take in at any one point, and sometimes it's easier just to use commonsensical terms for some of them, just to not overwhelm people, if you know what I mean.
Yeah, it's I'm very science-based. That's my background. So delving into LCT is comforting because it has some concepts that Science-based, but Bernstein is a bit over my reach. I'm trying to understand him.
Yeah, I think that's one of the things that makes knowledge to know so difficult. Is I start from Basil each time, and his writing is a phenomenon. Let's just say that. So that were both really fabulous talks. I can't believe that both of you are so early in your journey to, you know, I mean, you're engaging with theory that is quite complex, can be quite difficult to engage with, and you know, seem really adept at being able to talk about this stuff. I'm sorry, I'm just having a look at the chat at the same time. It's not called intellectualization. I don't think, is it? If it's called that, I withdraw the term. It's a horrible word. Anyway, sorry, that was me just engaging with Ian mentioning something. I'll have to rewrite that if that's actually what I called it. I'm opening the floor to anybody who wants to talk about any part of the both of those fantastic talks. So, for example, if anybody wants to talk about, for example, online work at Unisa as well as the pharmacy side of things, just jump in, please do, and argue away on anything at all. And thanks, Mandy, for saying that I'm lucid after Bernstein. I don't think that's a very high bar. Anybody want to jump in at all? Please, you're more than welcome to. I don't just want to dominate and talk. I hate the sound of my own voice. No? Okay, well, if nobody's has anything at this point, then fabulous. We're almost out of time anyway. Thank you both for, I mean, like, you know, again, respect for that. Doing these talks really early on is really, really good. Particularly, I'm just looking at the chat, people are saying, well done, you know, and I would also say, I think both of you are doing this, and I encourage everyone to do this, which is to not fall prey to the substantialist temptation or the substantialist fallacy, which this is the kind of thing where people only read stuff that's on their topic and tend to, you know, focus, oh, I'm only going to look at science subjects, or I'm only going to look at English literature, or I'm only going to look at, I mean, anything that uses these concepts is going to be of value to you, no matter how they do it methods-wise, no matter what level of education. And in education research, we are so fragmented into primary school, secondary, higher education. It always befuddles me when people say they, you know, they don't even engage with stuff that's on schools because they look at universities or vice versa. It makes no sense to me whatsoever, because every use of LCT in another context can provide you insight into what you're doing if it's using the same concepts or so on. So, you know, please do read. I'm talking to everyone, not just to you two, but to read widely. You know, if you're using semantic density, for example, and somebody else uses it to look at, I don't know, blogging, whatever it might be, then that is something that's really worth engaging in, because I cannot tell you how often when we were having weekly meetings of my PhD cohort, who were all pretty much now graduated, how much we learned from jumping from ballet to physics. It's amazing how much they contrast in topics, you know, from private sector to public sector, from school to university, from science to humanities. And that's why I was so pleased the two of you are coming together here. And you are, you know, illustrating the way in which we can learn about these things, you know, with both science and professional and English literature. I think that's fabulous. So well done. Great. Thanks very much, both of you. And I'm really looking forward to hearing more. Please let us know when you get through your proposal. Yeah?
Thank you.
And well done
Thank you
for
so
getting through
much, Carl.
yours as
Thank
well.
you.
It's not easy.
Thank you very much.
It's not easy, no. So well done for that. And thank you both for doing this today. And I look forward to seeing everybody here in a couple of weeks' time. And we'll send out the abstract and advert for that very shortly. So, and if anybody wants to go and look at the LCT website, the you may be part of being memorialized at the moment anyway, as part of the new web page for the Centre Online Roundtable. So who says that we can't multitask when we're doing these things, huh? It's already up. So thanks, everybody. Thanks for being here, and thank you for giving your talk. It's fabulous. It's really great to see such new stuff and new people coming through. And I mean, I'm looking forward to getting overseas again at some point so that I can actually come and meet some of you. You know, we're getting to a point now with this whole international travel ban for so long that for a year now that I'm beginning to. I've usually met most people in our city, but not always. So
We were actually we were at the Rhodes when you were going to be there last year. We were
yes.
there in Makanda, but yeah, that was just
right at the moment in which I was getting messages saying I was asking, am I supposed to be coming or not? Because I was in Johannesburg, and they were like, we don't know. And then it was within a matter of hours, you know, like, can you do it from another room? Can you do it from somewhere else? And can you bugger off? So I had to get out before the international borders shut. So unfortunately, but yes, we will. I'll be over again at some point.
Cool.
So
thank you so
thanks,
much. It was
everybody,
great to have this
and if it's
opportunity.
okay with you guys, we'll put this on our YouTube channel at some point after the end of semester.
Great, thanks.
Thanks, Mauricio. Can you you know, we can stop recording now, and thanks everybody for being here.